Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of React Native Radio. I'm Tim Jung, and joining me today on the panel is James Brenton.
Hey guys.
Also, our guest today is Catalin Miron. Catalin, if you want to introduce yourself, please feel free.
Hey, thanks for having me here. My name is Catalin Miron. I'm currently a developer working at Skype for more than 2 years now in the messaging team, where we build a cross-platform solution using React XP, which is a platform on top of React and React Native. I talk a little bit about it at the React Native conference in 2019 in September. If you'd like to find out more, you can just check the conference talk on YouTube. And side projects, I think that I'm doing mostly animations. I've started doing animations on web. Also wrote a couple of articles for Tots Plus. And then I was doing React since the beginning, I think 6 years ago. And then a colleague of mine went to React conference when it was announced React Native. And because it was in the audience, whoever was in the audience gained access to React Native private repository. And I was in that period learning Swift. So for me, because I also had React.js knowledge, jumping to React Native was really easy.
Early in my career, I figured out which jobs were worth working at and which ones weren't, mostly by trial and error. I created a system that I used to find jobs and later contracts as a freelancer. If you're looking for a job or trying to figure out where you should go next, then check out my book, The Max Coder's Guide to Finding Your Dream Developer Job. The book walks you through figuring out what you want, vetting companies that meet your criteria, meeting that company's employees, and getting them to recommend you for a job. Don't settle for whoever has listed their job on the job board. Go out and proactively find the job you'll love. Buy the book at devchat.tv/jobbook. That's devchat.tv/jobbook.
Since then, I actually built the very first complete application using React Native, which is a Dribble clone, and it's open source. Nowadays, it's not maintained anymore because Dribble API just cut everyone off, and I'm not able to build anything using Dribble API anymore, unfortunately. But that opened the gates for me doing awesome open source projects, because I received a lot of attention and I received lots of emails saying good words about my project. So I continue further using React Native as a side project, I would say, because I was a React developer by day and a React Native developer by night. So I'm a stalker. So I'm on Dribble, I'm on Pinterest, I'm on UI Movement, I'm wherever you find good motion designers, I'm on that platform as well, trying to find good UI interactions and micro interactions and animations in general. And I'm trying to recreate those. So after a while, stacking in React Native, I developed a series called Learning by Doing, where I'm actually taking those animations and trying to recreate those in React Native. And everything is open source. And lately, I'm also recording those sessions. And I have a YouTube channel where you can see me kind of giving tips and tricks, and also breaking down all the pieces in order to get that animations done in React Native.
Awesome. Well, no, it's cool to hear the whole kind of journey and process to, getting to where you are now, just that tidbit of all that. And just want to say welcome back to you. Actually were on the podcast previously, back when Nader Dabbit was still the host. So it's cool to have you back on.
Yeah, it's nice to be here again. It's a nice podcast, and thanks again for inviting me to this show. It's really nice.
Yeah, of course. And you kind of touched on it some, but today we're going to be talking a lot about animations and micro interactions specifically.
Yeah, that's a subject close to my heart, actually, and I really love to express myself in animations if it's possible. I actually gave a talk at React Day Berlin in December last year, 2019, where I have actually did a little comparison between what a micro interaction is and what a UI animation is, and what are the existing libraries out there for React Native, where you can implement either a micro interaction or a UI animation.
Can we talk a little bit about can you define what a micro interaction is?
Yeah, a micro interaction is funny though. It's not a tiny thing, even though the name suggests it. It's not going to take the entire space, and it's not going to perform multiple actions, or is not going to distract user. A micro interaction, it's basically an action that's gonna, the main goal of micro interaction is to help user whenever the user needs it. So for example, if you receive a notification and you have a bell icon somewhere on the screen, if it's just shaking a little, just to distract just a little, not too much the user, that's the perfect goal of micro interaction. And there are different types of micro interactions as well. So, for example, system status. If you'd like to notify the user whenever, for example, he's uploading an image, you would like to see the progress of that. So the system is actually giving you feedback saying, hey, you're at 50% progress for your upload. And also for the manipulation, adding to cart, for example, you can do a little pop-up animation saying that, hey, we've added the thing to your cart, and you can proceed with paying with the checkout, or just acknowledgement. Whenever you're on Twitter, right, and you like to favorite tweets, you have a little animation that pops in, and is not taking the entire space, right? It's just notifying you that you perform an action with success. So mainly that's the whole point of a micro interaction, and it shouldn't be too distracting for the user to see it. And it should help. The main goal of micro interaction is to just help the user achieving more.
Right. So it's very subtle animations even. It shouldn't be too intrusive where, I mean, I get this, certain animations you do want to be intrusive and you want to really stand out, but these micro ones are really all about being subtle, but adding that extra little level of detail, it sounds like.
Yes, exactly. And even though it's just a pure digital screen, I think the goal of micro interaction is to make us the whole movement as smooth and as natural as possible. Take, for example, dragging something on the screen, like you have a range, and you'd like to set a range in between 2 points, right? And you have a drag interaction there. You can modify some numbers on the screen while dragging, and that's something that indicate the user that, hey, this action is performed successful, and here are the number, or here is the position of your finger on the screen. And it's a subtle animation, or it's a small interaction with the user, but this is what differentiates applications and really good applications. And there are lots of applications out there, such as Twitter. I gave you an example with a favorite. But there's also Medium, for example. When you clap, you have just a little animation there that's engaging with the user.
Oh, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think that's, I think about my project, and I think that's something that I wish we did a lot better, because it really just could add, just that level of like intimate experience between the user and the app that really makes a big difference.
How do you gauge when there's too many micro interactions? At what point are you like, this activity deserves a little bit of animation? And when do you feel like it's appropriate to just have a flat response with a color change or something that just comes for free in React Native?
Yeah, I think we humans are like really advanced on this topic, because everything that surrounds us, it's an animation or a micro interaction. And I'm really, I'm 100% sure that most of us had this feeling that whenever they open the application and you're doing something and that micro interaction is not in place, or I don't know, you have too many micro interactions, you have this feeling that something is not slightly there, or something in your head, it matches a wrong experience. And I think that at that point, you should either remove some of them or make it even subtle, so the user or your eyes will not feel overwhelmed. It's just based on the instinct, more or less.
Yeah, so it's a feeling from using it and just a general sense of discomfort. Okay.
Yeah, one thing I think's kind of interesting is, sometimes I see myself as an engineer who's maybe not as experienced in design. Obviously it's not my area of expertise. So my question would be, do you typically come up with these microtransactions yourself, or do you tend to work with like a design team or something when you're coming up with them?
Yeah, I'm usually taking those from experienced designers or motion designers, as they are called, and I'm just trying to recreate those. And I'm the picking part is the trickiest one, because I tend to believe in my eyes. So whenever I'm seeing an animation which feels good, I'm actually taking it and trying to implement it, because out there on the internet you can find different kinds of animations or micro interactions in general, which they don't feel like too natural in a way or another, and those animations I'm trying to avoid as much as possible, and only taking the ones that are just feeling right and properly to be implemented in a real world application.
So how do you go through that whole process where, so you're seeing these animations, from designers and they look really cool, and then you decide you're going to go build this thing. How do you even dive into the whole process of, transcribing that essentially into your engineering terms?
Yeah, the first step is, so there are two possibilities here. Either you have a GIF or a GIF, or you have a MOV file, or I don't know, an MP4, right? With the MP4s are really easy because you can forward, or I don't know, go frame by frame to see how the things are actually moving on the screen. But in case of a GIF or a GIF, you can easily convert it into an MP4. And then I'll just go directly to QuickTime and play it frame by frame to see how the things are staggering. I don't know what's, if there is a stagger animation, if what's the movement, it's knees out, it's a linear. I'm just trying to match all these moving parts, and I just write down on a piece of paper saying that, hey, this element, it's moving first, and I'm just waiting 200 milliseconds in between animations, or this is how many elements are popping on the screen. For example, if you have the heart exploding, there are, I don't know, 12 different confettis popping around. So I'm just trying to match as close as possible, playing frame by frame the initial motion design. And making notes, putting everything on the paper, brainstorm before just jumping directly into the code. As I really want to do that, but in order to have a good output and a good animation, you really need to trust the motion designer, and you need to make it pixel perfect, I would say. I don't know how to translate that in a motion design world, but it's basically the same, pixel perfect for animations, and play it frame by frame and put everything down.
That's a really interesting way to look at it. I would not have thought of doing the conversion and checking frame by frame. I've had to do this, and I've just been staring at animation and trying to watch it. And actually, if I were to have converted it and looked at the frames, it would have made it a lot easier. Where do you go from there? Do you just start straight in React Native, or do you do it separately on like a code pen or something like that when you first start putting some stuff together?
Yeah, I'm doing everything in Expo mostly because it's really easy to get up and running with it. I'm also I think I'm amongst the first users of Snack. And
I love Snack. It's such a great
Snack,
yeah.
Exactly. It's mostly like a code pen, but for React Native. And in the beginning, it was even great because you could also share snacks, and everyone can have the feeling on their mobile phones. But usually I'm using Snack if I just want to prototype something really fast. But for example, for video tutorials, I'm using Expo directly. So Expo, you need the name of the project, and then everything gets up and running really, really fast.
Nice. Can you talk me through the process that you go through? Just the last animation that you wrote. Tell me about what that looked like.
The last animation that I did was a slider for a birthday date. And I was using multiple libraries there. The first one was Pose. Pose, it's a really tiny library for doing animations, but they also expose a helper. So because the slider had different segments, I just want to move near the closest segment whenever you scroll with your finger or you drag with the finger. Mm-hmm. And for example, in order to get the numeric value of the place where you are in that ruler, I was using the event. I was getting the event from the scroll view, and I was populating the input. So I had an input on the screen displaying the number of the ruler that you are scrolling to, and that was populated using the native event from the scroll view scrolling position, and I was just populating it directly.
Yeah, that makes sense. That's interesting. Do you always rely on libraries for the animations? Can you successfully animate with just CSS in React Native, or do you need some add-ons in order to make it a bit easier?
Yeah, React Native is not using CSS, but it's using the animated library, which is built in React Native. For most of my tutorials or in Learning by Doing series, I was using only animated API, which React Native exposed. But lately, I was also using React Spring, which is also a library for doing animations, which works cross-platform, and mostly the animated API, which React Native exposed. I didn't went too far with it, because if you're presenting an animation to a newcomer, for example, or to someone that haven't done any animation in the past, it's really hard to just say, hey, but for animation, we're not going to use animated API, which React Native exposed. We're going to use a different library. Just start slow and easy for newcomers in general.
Over the last many years, we've had a ton of terrific people on JavaScript Jabber. And one thing that I realized over the last few years was that we were missing out on some of the real story there. So we would talk about the topic that they were experts in and help you keep up on what's going on in the JavaScript community. But I felt like we had these terrific people on there and we didn't really talk about who they were. So I pulled together a show called My JavaScript Story. And what we do is we interview the people that we've had on JavaScript Jabber, or people just from the community. Maybe we'll have you on sometime. And we talk about how they got into programming, how they got into JavaScript, what they're working on, what they're well known for, and how they've developed their career. And some of the people are extremely well known and come from really interesting backgrounds. So if you're curious about how your JavaScript heroes got into JavaScript, then go check out My JavaScript Story. You can find it at myjsstory.com.
So I guess one thing I'm actually kind of interested in too is how, what are the limits of the built-in animated library? Like, what does it offer? But then kind of where does its mileage run out as well?
Yeah, there are some problems with the performance, for example. you can run on native thread only the transforms and opacity. So whenever you're trying to animate the color or something like that, you cannot rely on the native thread. So you'll drop frames, which is not ideal for micro interactions or animations in general, because they feel like really glitchy, I would say. And definitely for Android, it's not going to work great on low-graded devices. But for that, there is a great library called React Native Reanimated, which move everything to the native thread, so you don't block the JavaScript part. Everything is gonna run fluidly on all devices. Of course, there is some boilerplate, and the documentation it's not hard to digest, but it can be a blocker for a lot of developers. But just give it a try. I think that this learning by doing concept, it's really good, and you can apply it here as well. So whenever you're going through React Native Reanimated documentation, just do something. Just read it, maybe copy pasting it, and then mutate it or modified it in a way or another, and just get the feeling of how it is to code with React Native Reanimated. And if there are any problems, like for example the clock, which is a complex set timeout, I would say, in Reanimated, William Cadillon actually created Redash, which helps and remove this abstraction. And you can use timings, you can use easings really fast using that library, which is React Native Redash. Again, there are lots of libraries that you need to combine, but the end goal is for the user. So those two libraries actually gave the best user experience, and they'll not feel any dropping frames. Nothing will be blocked while animating. So worth trying it out.
It's interesting because there are a lot of different libraries out there for animations and micro interactions and all these things. I mean, even just already we've mentioned React Spring. We've talked about React Native Reanimated. And now you're saying too that a lot of the time it makes sense to combine multiple libraries. How do you evaluate that? Is there ever a point where you're just this library overkill and you're like, it's not worth it? Or like, are there just like some favorites that you tend to stick to, or do you really branch out and experiment with more lesser known libraries too?
Yeah, I tend to stick with some particular libraries because I just want to master them. Like for example, I really enjoyed working with Pose, which now it's the Framework Motion library. I also dig really deep into React Spring. But again, those two libraries are not meant to work like really performant on React Native. Even though they are trying to, they are not built in React Native. They tend to support multiple platforms, also web and mobile. And there are some downsides to it, but usually I think that the animated API which React Native exposed is really good, as long as you don't want to do too many animations, like really hard ones. I don't know, you want to move, you have a shared element transition, for example, or you want to move elements while fetching some data. Those cases are like extreme cases or corner cases, and it really requires performant libraries such as Reanimated. But other than that, just moving pixels on the screen, or just creating a tiny micro interaction, animated API from React Native will do the best job there.
That does actually kind of bring me on to the next thing I wanted to ask you, which is, at what point do you feel like you can't do the animations that you wanted to do in React Native? What is there that's requires too much performance, or maybe you would have to do natively? or just isn't going to work out for you? Have you come across anything like that?
Of course, because
yeah,
that's why I've also created learning by doing and all my projects on GitHub, because I saw lots of developers facing this problem. And for me, I'm looking on from a different angle to this problem. For me, it's always a challenge in order to create or recreate some animations, even though they are really hard to do. I'm just stretching my head around it, and I'm staying maybe weeks in order to get it right, and just share my knowledge with others. I think that's why also William Catalin it's so popular with Can It Be Done in React Native, because a lot of developers coming from different worlds, because this is React trying to also move to the native or to mobile, right? If you're coming from a web perspective, just jumping into animations in React Native, it's a totally different thing. And just trying to recreate small parts, I think that will do the trick. And I've encountered lots of problems, and usually I ping William if I need any help with anything. But usually it's a challenge, and I'm always looking at those problems as challenges, not actually issues or problems, and something that cannot be done.
So I'm actually curious on this topic of can it be done? I know this one thing that you talk about sometimes in your talks is, keeping that 60 FPS going on. And I imagine when you're evaluating, can I do this animation or it's micro interaction, you're paying close attention to, are you dropping frames or any of this stuff? But for, our listeners, or for even me, how are you actually paying attention to when those frame drops are happening? How do you know? Are you actually going back and testing on old Android devices and stuff too? At what point, what data do you specifically see where you're just okay, this animation is causing a worse experience because we aren't hitting 60 anymore?
Yeah, the first step I'm usually doing and building mostly everything in iOS. And if iOS is not moving properly, I'm not going to check Android because it's going to be even worse. And I'm trying to get to 60 FPS on iOS first. And I have a real device, a physical device, a Nexus 5X. And I'm running that animation on that device, which is not really performant. It's not the worst device, I would say. But if something really happens on Android, for example, there is an inspector in React Native showing you the FPS real time. And from there, I'm just digging into the code and debugging it. Mostly because I'm running something else while doing the animation can cause a problem. Like I gave you an example, fetching something from an API, or mapping through a huge list of items, or while scrolling through a big list, I'm also animating something. Those particular things are blocking the whole thread, and your animation is not gonna the event loop is gonna be blocked. So your animation will definitely lose frames. But again, that's a problem which was fixed with React Native Reanimated, because there is no loop on JS thread. So everything happens on the native thread.
What's your strategy then? One thing you mentioned, for instance, is you're scrolling through a huge list and you're doing some animation, and you notice that there's a performance issue because of that. How do you fix something like that? Do you choose to pause the animation until the scrolling's done, or what are common things that you run into?
Usually I'm trying to avoid running animations while scrolling, because if you're scrolling, you definitely want to find something. If I'm coming with an animation, I think it's a bad user experience, and I'm trying to avoid those to beat head in head. So, but if definitely requires an animation. For example, I don't know, you have a score at the top of in the header, and while scrolling you're just increasing that score or that number, or I don't know, you want to show the progress of your scroll. I'm just trying to use a native driver for that, and I'll avoid any pain. And for example, animated API has native driver for transforms, so yeah, I'm just trying to mess around with mostly the native driver properties that I can work with to just avoid any performance issues.
So is it a case of sort of choosing the correct library for the type of animation you want to use? So if you know it's the example that you gave there, which is part of the Animate library, is that a reason to then use that over something else?
Yeah, if I'm just trying to have as less libraries as possible. Again, it's a matter of how big is gonna be that application, or how many animations are we gonna perform, or how is the screen populated. Because whenever you're starting working on an application, you usually have some screens or some designs, not particular animations, but you have the designs in place, and you can figure it out if there will be some movement on the screen. And based on that, you can just take some notes and see if it's feasible to go with animated API built in React Native, or to learn or move to reanimate it. I think learning reanimated API, it's a huge win for everyone, because it's challenging in the first place, but then you it's like releasing the Kraken. You'll be unstoppable once you just master that library. It's your imba.
If you had to pick one library, would that be the one that you tell people to go right for?
To pick one, reanimated definitely.
Cool.
It's the library to go. And for small, for example, usually startups are doing this. You want to just build a proof of concept or an MVP, right? You don't want to be like super performant. You just want to have something animated on the screen, and you want to do it really fast. And for that, I really recommend Animatable by Oblador, which is it's gonna save ton of time, and everything will run really good, just for MVPs, and not only for MVPs, but for getting started and having an application up and running with animations. Animatable have, I think, mostly 140 different animations built in, and it also supports native threads, so native drivers. So if you're just moving or animating different values such as transform and opacity, it's also smart enough to use the native driver. So yeah, totally.
So I guess one thing that's interesting to me too is how many of these actually like support hooks and everything? I know React Spring is one that definitely does, but are the rest also keeping up on that kind of thing?
Yeah, as far as I know, Reanimated supports hooks. I think not for everything, but definitely supports hooks. And Redash, it's built entirely on hooks. I may be wrong, but mostly everything that Redash exposed, Redash it sits on top of Reanimated, is more like a helper library. Everything William built everything with hooks, so it's really nice to use and really easy to dig.
Awesome. It's actually super useful to know because, yeah, I definitely would want to dive into trying out Reanimated and knowing that it has the Redash on top of it for hooks would be perfect.
Yeah, it's really great, and William did a great job, and he's actually maintaining it properly, and you can see him all over the place, and he's trying to do his best to support new versions and to support everything and make developer life easier. So it's increasing both developer experience plus user experience, because no matter how hard you're trying, the end goal is to please users' eyes and to increase the user experience. So your application is gonna receive lots of 5 stars and a good rating.
Are there any issues using animations between Android and iOS platforms? Is it write once and it works in both every time? Or do we find that sometimes there are issues where one doesn't work in the other?
I haven't encountered any problems on cross-platform animations. There are different parts which they don't work properly cross-platform, such as overflow hidden, for example. I remember back then there were lots of problems with overflow on Android, or the UI it's kind of wrong between those two platforms. But the animated API, they just expose the same API. The animated expose the same API cross-platform, and it's working the same. Of course,
it doesn't make sense that it would be.
Yeah, but the performance can be like a little. You might have issues with performance on Android, maybe because of the nested childs and nested views, but it should work seamlessly.
So one other thing that I kind of picked up on, watching your talk you gave in Berlin, was you also talk about something called shared element transition. And there's a few things under there, like you have some things like magic move, shared element, fluid transition. What are these things, and how are you kind of using them in projects that you're maintaining?
Yeah, I was building also a tutorial on YouTube using shared element transition, and I was using a library based on animated API exposed by React Native. It's not bulletproof, and definitely there are some performance issues because it's mostly JS animation, right? And whenever you're moving elements from a screen to another, you need to display elements based on a server response, and it's gonna lose frames. And a really nice shared element transition library which exists, it's actually built on in native, so everything is native, both Android and iOS, and it's called React Native Shared Element, and it's based on Reanimated API for animations, plus the movement from a screen to another. It's happening on it's a native module, and previously it was Magic Move, but it was using again some animated API from React Native, and you could lose some frames. But then the creator actually moved everything to the native, and you have the native performance out of the box for shared elements. And it's also exposed in Expo by default. Now they've introduced that library directly in Expo, so you don't need to link anything. And it's the most performant library, I would say, for shared element transition.
Many of you have probably heard about App Store optimization and how it can help you get more downloads. There's a lot of demand for apps right now, so it's a really great time to give it a try. It's easier than you think. The folks at App Figures have easy step-by-step guides and intuitive tools which many indie developers are using to get more downloads. The guys who run it are indie devs who have a need and created the tool. 11 years later, it's an all-in-one platform for developers who want to get more downloads and make more money with their apps. Try App Figures for free, and if you like it, you can use our special code RNR3030 to get 30% off for the next 3 months.
Nice. Yes, I was watching that video, and just some of the shared element stuff is something I never really thought about too much before. I mean, it really creates, and I guess to like describe some of the things I saw was like, on one screen you have like a box, and when you navigate to the next screen, it kind of sticks around. Instead of just flashing over to another screen, you see, this box kind of jump over, and now it's living in the next screen. And it just kind of makes it really clear what action the user took. Maybe if you click the box and then it hung around, it kind of makes it so you feel like you haven't lost your place in the app in a way, which I thought was super interesting.
Yeah, that's the whole point of a shared element transition, is to inform user, hey, this is the elements which needs to be on the next screen, because something will happen with it, such as, for example, a shopping cart. You'll have multiple elements on the screen, but the final thing that matters maybe can be the price, and you can move that price in between screens seamlessly. And the math behind it is really simple. The trickiest part is to get it done in a performant way, because you can calculate, you can get the position of that element from the first screen and on the second screen, and just do an interpolation and apply some different styles to it. And apply a different, in shared element transition, the routing is happening with the fade transition. And first you fade to the second screen and then move the element, and then fade in or do different animation to the second screen to display the rest of the elements from the second screen. So it's a step-by-step animation, and the fade in out, it's the routing animation that's happening there.
In a way, it's almost kind of like a magic performance. You're kind of pulling some secret levers behind the curtain that the user's not necessarily aware of to make the magic happen of how it actually is perceived by the user.
Yeah, exactly. That's the point.
Right. Yeah,
tricking the eyes of the user is the best thing ever, because you can sell, you can promote, you can do whatever you'd like if you can trick user eyes and please them. That's really hard to do in a mobile application. But once you do it and you know what to do, I think it's worth any time invested in that part.
What's your favorite animation that you've written in that case?
I came across a dribble animation. It's about a seat selector, and you have an array or a matrix by, I don't know, 6 by 6 or so,
Sure.
And which kind of where you can for each position you have kind of seat, and there is you can select the seats, right? But you also have a button which refresh the whole matrix, and the way it get refreshed is really nice, because it's coming from top left to bottom right, and it's kind of wave happening there. And I'm really proud for that animation, because I was also thinking, how can I actually create the animations, how can I get the diagonal of that matrix, because it's like really really nice. And yeah, I'm really proud for that animation. It didn't took a while, and I was really surprised with the output, I would say.
That's super cool. No, it really shows the level of passion and care you have for this. And it makes me think about one thing that you talked about in the video talk you gave, which was you had this point that features are what draw someone to the app, and then details are what keep them. And definitely hearing you talk about, making sure that animation, that micro interaction that you were working on was perfect, really just shows like the level of care you have for those details that keep people.
Yeah, actually, I didn't want to sell anything on that talk. I just want to be honest there. And again, the end goal is to make a beautiful application. Definitely, the UI matters the most. Almost the most, because without animations, you're not gonna, because users on the mobile side especially, they are looking for those animations. It's the it sits in the roots of mobile application to have animations, and everything should be smooth and fluid and natural. So if you even though you're building the most beautiful application and everything is glitchy and just popping out without any natural way of appearing, it's gonna devastate the user eyes, and it's not gonna use that application. No matter how hard are you gonna struggle before that.
I think, it's actually really interesting just how much these small things that you can do, and some of them not small, some of them big too, that just really bring a lot to an app. And I guess since we're kind of wrapping up on time, I'll ask one final question on this topic, which is essentially, now that you've sold me I need to do this more, how do I go talk to my UI and my UX team and convince them to start doing more of this, designing more, getting these motions, because you mentioned motion designer as a word earlier too. How do I get everyone on board to make this a thing?
They should have this in blood. I think it's part of the user journey inside the application, no matter what. And just from my perspective, just start small and usually use small libraries or just animated API built in React Native just to move things around. Not too many, just the parts which you feel that are quite important to the application, such as start with animating a button whenever you press it, or animate the appearing of the title, or do a little fade in, fade out animation. Look up for inspiration on dribble, UI movement. Nowadays there are 3 or maybe 4 different platforms that offers only animations for mobile applications, such as UI movement, it's one, Up Labs is the second one. And you'll find there different animations or micro interactions, and just look up for inspiration and apply some of those learnings into your application. But first start small, because you don't want to overcrowd the whole scene there and just move everything because you can, right? Don't do a stagger animation for all the elements or for all the letters in that appears on the screen. Just start small. A good example it's the button that you can scale in, scale out based on the touch.
Cool, great advice, and actually super interesting topic. We're going to move on to our picks now, which is just for users who don't know, this is kind of where the panelists and the guests get to talk about something that they just want to talk about because they think it's cool or they want to share it with you guys at the end of the show. So, James, if you want to kick us off, feel free.
Okay. This week, the UK is still in lockdown. I think last week I talked about Rocksmith for the guitar. This week, I've just been back to playing computer games, and I've been playing Minecraft. Back into it. It's such a great lockdown game. It's so wonderfully addictive, and everyone's kids like to play it. Anyone who's got it can join in online. It's a great co-op game. And I've been having a lot of fun playing that with some friends this last week.
I've actually been playing Minecraft a little bit too. I have one of those Minecraft Realm servers that I'll just jump into, and I have it set up to be creative mode because I just like to build, and it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, I also started to play Dota too, and my wife, she's just screaming around saying, why are you doing it again? And I'm just trying to delete Steam nowadays, but
it's a slippery slope.
Very hard.
So our viewers can't see it, but you can. This is my water bottle I've been drinking out of. The whole thing.
Yeah, I saw it. That's why I want to introduce it.
Nice. Yeah, that's a good pick. Yeah, Dota's an interesting game. It's a very angry game, but it's also a game where you just can't get an experience like what you get in Dota. It's just it's like a level of high that no other game really offers. So good to bring that up too. So for my pick, I'm going to highlight something a little different than normal. And it's probably not going to be something most viewers will even like. But my favorite rap artist, his name is Jung. He's a Swedish rapper. came out with a new album called Stars with a Z at the end. I really like it. I think it's like his best album yet. So you guys should, if you're into rap and you like something has like heavy Swedish influences to it, you should check out that album. And Catalin, if you want to do your pick, what do you got for us this week? And you can have multiple things too. It doesn't have to be just one thing.
Yeah, fortunately, I have two things, maybe three, but two especially. I really enjoy lately. I bought a new camera just to record my YouTube videos, but also take pictures. And it's a Sony Alpha 6400, and I really enjoy it. It's the best camera ever. I had a Nikon, and the difference is huge. I cannot compare those two. And if you really want to start recording yourself or shooting some nice photos, I highly recommend the Sony 6400. And the second pick, it's a shameless plug, but I'm working on a platform called Jobs with. If you're familiar with Dribble, it's the same, but Jobs with 3 B's and Z at the end. So jobs.com. And it's a platform where mainly it's aggregating jobs from all the platforms in the world, trying to get everything on a single website. And I'm working intensively on that. Hopefully I'll get up and running in a couple of weeks now. And the last it's Hasty Tips. Hasty Tips, it's giving tips and tricks via code. So it's a developer-based platform. And with possibility to share on Twitter your snippets, your tips, and everyone nowadays on Twitter share different carbon images with different tips and tricks. So I thought that it's a good time for creating a dedicated platform for that. So check it out if you'd like. Those are in progress, but I'll release them as soon as possible.
Awesome.
Nice.
Yeah, I was thinking too, back to Dota for a second, sorry, but if they have the international back over in Europe again, I hope to see you there. So let me know.
I don't know if my wife and my daughter will be proud of me, but I'll do my best.
Okay, cool. Yeah, because I'll probably try to make my way out to Europe sometime for that next international. But so I'll keep you in mind. But thanks.
I'm trying to avoid any games. I was a pro Counter-Strike player, so I know the feeling. I know how to spend dirty nights and stuff. So
cool. All right. Well, thanks guys for joining us. If people want to follow you, Catalin, where can they do that at?
I'm on Twitter. It's twitter.com/Miron Catalin, MironCatalin. Just ping me there. If you need any help, I'm more than happy to help you out. And you can also check my YouTube video, which is on my profile. So more than happy to help whoever wants to jump into animations in React Native.
Awesome. And James, where can our guests find you?
You can find me on Twitter as well. It's @SternJobName, which is a terrible handle.
I do like that it's an anagram of your actual name.
Yes, awesome. It seemed like, honestly, like when I came up with that, I was like, this is a really great idea, guys. Everyone's going to love this. And then, of course, it's not at all memorable and it's got nothing to do with me.
I don't know. I kind of like it. It kind of stands out in its own way. And listeners, if you want to follow me, it's Tim Jung, Dev, DEV at the end. So, thanks again, guys. See you next week.
Bye.
Bandwidth for this segment is provided by CacheFly, the world's fastest CDN. Deliver your content fast with CacheFly. Visit CACHEFLY.com to learn more.